Okay, we're on Pehei Amud Beis. Okay, so we're going to start with a little bit of a harder Gemara, and then we're going to get to a much easier Gemara. So just bear with me, okay? Okay, it's just been a little bit of a harder stretch. So let's go. So the last thing we saw was discussion between Rav and Shmuel about usage by air. So what that means by usage by air is typically what this meant is that in a scenario where there is the only way something is accessible is by going horizontally, then Rav was the one who said that usage by air does not restrict. In other words, if you have to, only way you're able to reach something by air, that's not really called a usage. That was basically what we took out of Rav, and Shmuel said it is a usage. That was more or less the conclusion that we had, that is going horizontally considered a usage in the sense that it'll restrict on like that is considered enough of a usage that let's say when you have a shared space and one of the parties or both of the parties are only able to reach by air, meaning horizontally, that Rav said it would not restrict in such a case. That's what we saw yesterday and the day before. So now the Gemara continues. Yosef Rabruna v'ka'amar lo hashmaita. Rabruna was repeating what he heard from Rav, okay, about from our Gemara. And the last thing we discussed was this case of the ruins. The case of the ruins was the way we initially understood it, if you remember from 84b or 85a3, and that was a scenario where you had two homes, and then you had three ruins, right? And what we said is that each home is able to use the place immediately next to them, okay? And that's because it's right next to them. The place that's opposite them all the way across, they can't use because the fact that it is usage by air. In other words, the way they're reaching it is simply is horizontally, okay? And that's something which is not going to cause prohibitions according to Rav. But the middle case, the middle ruin is going to be asur. We never explained why the middle case is asur. Okay, that was what we said. Rav said the two houses next to them, the two houses on each side, the person's allowed to use. The house in the middle, they're not allowed to use. So Rabrona was telling this in front of Rabbi Eliezer, and Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Barbe Rav, Amar Rav Hachi, student of Rav's academy. Did Rav really say this in the Beis Medrash? Amar Le'in, he said yes, he did. Ach v'le'ushpize. Rabbi Eliezer says, show me where Rav lives. Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer must have been visiting. He wasn't like someone there. He's like, I want to speak to this man. Okay, ach v'le. Okay, he shows him where he lives. Aslik made a Rav. Rabbi Eliezer shows up in front of Rav. Amar Le, Amar Mar Hachi, did you really say this? Amar Le'in. Rav said, yes. He was a good student. He repeated what I said. Amar Le. So now Rabbi Eliezer says what his question is. Vamar hu Amar lezeb shilshol lezeb zrika shnei masurim. I don't understand. We had the concept earlier. Rav was the one who famously said that if one is able to lower and one is able to throw, and there's a space in between both of them, right? And one of them has to lower it to reach that space, and one has to go up to reach that space. Shmuel said, and remember, Shmuel said the one who goes lower is easier, and therefore Shmuel said that person gets it. Rav said, no, at the end of the day, Rav wasn't arguing that it's easier. Rav says, but at the end of the day, the gradation of ease of use is not enough to say that one gets to use it, one doesn't. In a scenario where it's just like I walk out my door, that's my space, right? Another person's go up or go down, then we give it to the person who goes out there who just has the door. But in a case where one's going up, one's going down, Rav says, granted, going down may be easier, but it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, they're all difficult usages, and therefore they both have equal use. In other words, we don't care about scale. We don't care about how usable it is. In other words, once we say there's some difficult of use, it doesn't matter that some have easier difficult to use or harder difficult to use. Both of them have difficult to use, and therefore it's equal, and they're both asur. She says, there, didn't you say that? And so why is this different than this case? In other words, in this case, so since you say in that case it's asur, in this case too, at the end of the day, both of them have to go ahead and, for a party over here, in the case of the three ruins, granted it's a little bit harder to reach this space, but at the end of the day, they're both able to reach, for the guy over here, it's harder for him to reach the space all the way across, right? Because it's horizontal usage. But at the end of the day, there's still usage they both have usage of the space. So why are you saying that this person over here is able to use this chutz over here? The people over here can't even see this. Okay, whatever. What's it called? Guys, show up. What's it called? Okay, this guy over here can't use the space. This guy over here, this guy on this side is allowed to use the space. This guy on this side is allowed to use the space. Okay, so Rav Eliezer is asking, at the end of the day, granted, this person has it easier, but then this person's reach it. But at the end of the day, this person is able to reach it. So why is it us? Why is it permitted for this guy and us for this guy? What's going on? So Amrle mi savras dekami kishura. Do you think that the ruins are positioned in a straight line? Ruin A, ruin B, ruin C? No. Dekami v'chatzuva. We're talking about a case where they are positioned in like a tripod, meaning like this. Meaning the reason that what's happening is, and you have the picture, but I'll explain it. Bless you. How are we going to do this? Okay, this is going to be an aerial view, okay? House, okay? And house, and then you have ruin, Okay, ruin. Okay, so basically what the Mishnah was saying was that they open a little window, whatever. Basically, what the Mishnah, what Rav was teaching us was that this person's allowed to use this area, this person's allowed to use this area, and they both can't use this area. In other words, initially we assumed that they're one after another, and therefore the question was, at the end of the day, they have equal usage of all this space over here, and so the question is, why is this usher? Why are these ones permitted? Now we're understanding. No, this one's in the back, and this one is completely, fully, equally used over here. This one has different usage over here. They have this little wall over here, slightly different ruin, and therefore we can now understand why this one's allowed to use it. This one's allowed to use this one. This one's going to be usher, and it's because of a misunderstanding of the case. And that's the bottom line, and that's why that case is usher. Okay, fine. Amalei Papa Rabba. Now we go back to Shmuel. Shmuel was the one who said that usage by air does cause prohibitions. Okay, yes, does cause prohibitions. Amalei Papa Rabba. Lema Shmuel leisle to Rav Dimi. Does Shmuel not hold Rav Dimi? What does that mean? Okay, the Shmuel because Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. We saw this statement teaching many times, both in Eruvin as well in Shabbos. Makom she'embo arba al arba mutlav ne'ershus rabim le'ershus yach lechat velav uvan shliach lifu. So you basically have a case like this. You have public domain, okay, and you have private domain, private, and you have this space in between. Okay, this is a bad idea. Okay, because this is okay, I don't know. Okay, this is aerial, but this is going to be now not bird's eye view. This is going to be whatever, regular view. And you have this space which is narrow. It's not 4x4. It's like 2. Okay, and which is standing directly in between the both of them. Okay, it's directly in between the both of them. And directly in between the both of these places. Okay, small space in between. It's what did I do? Yeah, it's two. It's less than 2 across. Okay, and it's between the private domain and the public domain. Okay, the views are all messed up. Just bear with me. Okay, fine. No. So what do we see? Both the people in the private domain and the public domain can both place their things on that whatever it's called. Sorry, not it's not an alleyway. Sorry, it's like a ledge. It's like. Yeah, it's not an alleyway. This whole place is not an alleyway. There's basically this space in between them. It's not even it's not even so much. You don't even have to worry about it's not like there's an alleyway between them. It's just basically there's a private domain that kind of ends, and kind of they end together. They end over here, and or doesn't. Yeah, fine. They would consider it like that. And there's this thing over here, which is less than 2 across. Okay, so they're both allowed to use it. The classic case of this is really like a stoop. Okay, you have like a house, okay, and whatever, and there is like this little thing between them, and it goes directly into the public domain. So this is private, right, and this is public, so basically they could both use this space, which is between the private and the public, which is like a small stoop, right? As long as they don't switch from one person to the other, okay? So, as long as they don't switch, okay? So what do you see from here? So the Gemara is asking, does Shmuel not hold this, right? Does Shmuel not hold this? Why? Because at the end of the day, the people in the assumption is that the people, let's say, the people in the Rishus Rabbim are using this space by vertical usage. In other words, they have to lift themselves up and they have to lift up their hands and put something on something which is which is less than 4 tefachim. If something's less than 4, then what do we consider? It's considered it's not placed on the ground, right? In other words, if something is a substantial space, it's considered this is considered placed down, right? But if something is very narrow, if I were to have like a stick over here and someone put this something over here, what is this considered like being placed? The assumption over here is that it's not considered like being placed on the ground, right? And therefore, if it's not placed on the ground, what's the opposite of the ground? The air, right? And so what comes out over here is that Rav Dimi is saying it's permitted. Why is it permitted? The Gemara assumes the reason it's permitted, and actually, I'm going to stick with this, sorry. The Gemara says that the reason it's permitted is because this is considered usage by air, right? Because it's not actually placed down. And this was part of the machlokes Rav and Shmuel. We haven't applied it to a scenario like this. Until now, we've been talking about 2 people with a share, 2 chatzeros opening up into a space. But over here, why is it permitted for the people in the private domain and public domain to use this space? At the end of the day, they're sharing a space. Whenever you have a shared space, they should assert on each other, right? Because the public domain has direct access to it, and the private domain has access to it. So whenever you have those scenarios, it should cause a prohibition on one another. The fact that it doesn't would seem to be because of the fact that it's airspace. it's not actually placed down, right? And this is the statement of Rav Dimi. Does Rav Yo, and no one, as far as we knew until now, no one disagreed with Rav Dimi saying that it's permitted for both of them to use the space. Now the question is why? Again, it's space in the air, right? Rav was the one who said, now Rav is fine, because Rav said that anytime there is usage by air, it doesn't cause prohibitions. That is not called, there's no way of prohibiting as long as it's usage by air. So until now we've been talking about usage by air, meaning someone is going horizontally across a space. The fact that there's a horizontal usage is meaningless. But over here we're using a different application of it. We're using a very narrow thing, a little bit wider than this pen. But the point is that it's narrow space, and you're putting something on this narrow space. And Rav Zimi is saying the reason it's not usher for them both, for the private domain and public domain, to both use this space. Presumably why? Because it's airspace, and airspace is not going to cause prohibitions. With me? Mm-hmm. Yeah? So the Gemara says, no. The Gemara says, you're right. The Gemara says, there actually is, Shmuel actually agrees that airspace should not cause prohibitions. The reason that, and therefore, the reason this Mekom Petur is going to be permitted for both of them to use it is indeed for that reason. Is because at the end of the day, it's airspace. It's airspace, and airspace does not aser. When you're using airspace, when it's not an actual space, in other words, take a step back. Whenever you have two houses opening up into a courtyard, right? They both want to use the physical ground of that space. They ask for each other because at the end of the day, there's ground over here. When you're talking about two people, let's say you had a scenario, bear with me for a second, where there is no physical usage of the land. It's just like they both want to go ahead and put things in the air. I don't know, maybe even a clothesline. Maybe be a good example. I don't know. I'm not sure if this is halachically true, but let's go with this for a second. They both want to use clotheslines in the shared space, but no one's actually using the ground. Maybe you would say that then we could have a theoretical possibility. That's called airspace, right? Because they're not using the ground. So Mekom Petur, even though you're putting it on the ground, but since it's so narrow, halachically, unless something is 4 tefachim wide, we don't consider that to be on the ground. It's like a clothesline. It's on something, doesn't matter. It's on something. So we're asking, Shmuel, you're the one who told us that when you have airspace, it should cause prohibitions, right? You're the one who said clotheslines should cause prohibitions. So why over here, when you have this narrow space, doesn't it cause a prohibition? So Shmuel answers, really, I hold airspaces do not cause prohibitions. And over here, in the case of the public domain and private domain that have this narrow thing, this narrow pole in between them, really, it's fine. It's 100% fine. So why in the case, which case did Shmuel say airspace is problematic? If you remember, he said in the case of the wells. That's where it all started. The case of the well in between two places, and the only way they're able to reach it is by going over airspace of more than 4 tefachim, and he said it does cause prohibitions. Why? He says because there, it's rabbinic. When it's rabbinic, remember, sometimes we have this principle, people don't take rabbinic laws so seriously, right? People always is this a rabbinic issur or a biblical issur? Doesn't matter, but it is rabbinic. So, but you still have to listen. But the point is that people, it's human nature, always was human nature. People don't take the Chazal as seriously as they do the Torah, which we understand why. And therefore, Shmuel says, when it's this pole, which is going between a public domain and a private domain, which are both 100% biblical, there, people are going to be much more concerned, not afraid of people going ahead and abusing this law. When it comes to rabbinic prohibitions, i.e., 2 courtyards, which are all rabbinic because it's private domain. There we have to be more stringent. That's why I needed the pole to stick out. That's the end of that discussion. Okay. Amar le Ravina le Rava mi Amar Rav Hachi. Did Rav really say that by way of air does not restrict? Well, Itmar wasn't it taught? Shnei batim shnei tzidi rishus harabim. Right, again, so Rav was the one who says the opposite. Rav says that air by way of air does not prohibit. So wasn't it said, Shnei batim and Shnei tzidi rishus harabim, you have 2 houses. Let's say a person owns 2 homes. Okay, beautiful. Guy owns 2 homes, but instead of buying 1 home in Florida and 1 home in Baltimore, he buys 1 house on one side of the street and 1 house on the other side of the street. Okay, fine. And now he wants to go ahead and throw something from one house to the other house. Fine. So, remember, you're not allowed to throw things from my home to Tzvi's home would be usher. Because there's a concern, I might mix it up with other domains. But if it's my home and my home, that prohibition doesn't exist. The problem is there's a Rishus Haram in the middle. Okay, so I'm standing in one house, and so Rabba Bar Rav Huna Amar Rav Asur Lizrok Mizel Lezeh. Rav says you can't throw from one to another. Shmuel Amar Mutar Lizrok Mizel Lezeh, and Shmuel says you are allowed to throw from one another. We're going to focus on Rav, even though Shmuel, although this does seem to be a contradiction to his regular position, because he normally says airspace does aser, but over here again we're talking about Rishuyos Daraisa. It's a public domain, full-fledged public domain Daraisa, private domain of the houses, and therefore, like the Gemara before, Shmuel's not going to be a problem. But with Rav, why does Rav say it's forbidden? right? Why does Rav say it's forbidden? At the end of the day, the usage from one place to the other is just going to be the airspace of throwing it across from one to the other. So the issue over here, he says, no, really Rav would have no problem. In other words, the assumption over here initially was that Rav said it's usher is because at the end of the day they are, because the fact that you're going to be using the airspace of what? Whose airspace? They're both his properties on both sides. Whose airspace? Just as Rabbim. There's just the public domain. In other words, there is shared airspace with the public domain. So the assumption was the reason Rav said it's prohibited is because the private domains, which are owned by one person, I own both of them. But I am going to be using a private domain that is shared, it's private domain, and it's public domain, and it's shared space between the both of them, even though it's usage of airspace. In other words, it's not going on the ground, it's just going over the Rishus Rabbim. Rav saying it's Aser because it's being shared with the Rishus Rabbim. So that means usage by airspace is Aser, right? And that's the question. Rav always said it's mutter, right? So the Gemara says no. It's not because of the fact that there's shared space that's used by both of them. The Gemara answers the reason is because the houses are not opposite one another. One house is over here, one house is over there. So if the houses are opposite each one another, okay, we could assume the person will have no problem throwing it over properly, and Rav would say it's mutter. Even though the public domain uses that same space, doesn't matter. Because again, Rav says airspace does not Aser. So what's the case Rav said it's Aser? Is when they're like this. And we assume that people, especially Jews, don't have such good throwing arms. Okay, we're not so athletic. And so the bottom line is, there's a concern that you're going to throw it. It's going to fall. It's going to fall where? Into the public domain. You're going to pick it up. That's why it's Aser. But it's nothing to do with it. You made a wrong assumption. End of this Gemara. New Gemara, if you didn't follow anything for the past little while, that's okay. It's been very hard Gemaras. And we are going to start a new Mishnah, which talks about where you place your Erev Chatzeros and your Shitufim Avos. Again, Erev Chatzeros is what? Erev Chatzeros is, we all own one courtyard. We have to place a piece of, some food in a home, as we'll see. And what's the idea of Erev Chatzeros? That we're saying one home, that is our home. It's our shared home. And now we all live in that home. And therefore, we're all basically negating our home, and now we all live in Tzvi's home, because we're all putting our food in Tzvi's home, and Tzvi's so generous, and therefore thank you for hosting us. We're all living in your house. Fine. That's Erev Chatzeros. Erev Shitufim Avos is we have a bunch of different Chatzeros. They open up into a street. There we are incorporating, making it all as one. It's a slightly different partnership. We're not all saying we live in one house, but we're saying that they're all incorporated as one business, I guess we'll say. So we'll see with that in mind, we'll see the slight differences. So a note saying, as a Eruv Beis Shar Achsan Repes, the person plays the Eruv, meaning for Eruv Chatzeros, in a gatehouse, a portico, or a gallery, ain't no Eruv. It is not an Eruv. Why is it not an Eruv? Because it has to be a house. If we play, the whole idea is we're all living together in one house. If we place it in a gatehouse, that's not a place where someone lives. And therefore, that's not considered one house. Vadarsham, furthermore, someone who lives in one of those places, which is not considered a house, they live in a shed. Let's say a person is living in a shed. Okay, it happens. Nabuch. Eina Osir Lav. It does not cause a prohibition. Why? Because a chatzir, the prohibition is caused when there is a person living there, and we don't just mean practically they happen to be sleeping there, but there's a house there which is not considered, which is not part of the Eruv. But if it's a non-house, a person sleeping, heaven forbid, on the street, or sleeping on a shed, that's not enough of a house that causes the prohibition. And similarly, placing it in such a place is not going to be the right place to place there. It has to be in a person's home, because the idea is we're all living in the same home.
This is the same, this is the regular Erev.
This is a regular Erev Chatzeros, correct.
Wait,
correct.
I thought our matzah was in the synagogue.
Base of Teven, or base of Bakar, base of Eitzim, or base of Taros. So a straw shed, a barn, a wood shed, a storehouse, Hareze Erev. That is an Erev, okay, meaning apparently people used to live there, and that's where the Gemara says that you're allowed to place the Erev there, Vajar Sham Oser, and a person who lives there, it restricts other people from going there, meaning a person lives in a barn, or a wood shed, or a storehouse, that was normative for people to put a bed in one of these places and live there. Again, different world back then. Therefore, a person living there would cause other people, if he has to join the Erev, that person's not joining the Erev, there would be prohibitions, right? It would cause everyone to be usher if he didn't join the Erev, and it is a full-fledged house, and therefore you place the Erev in that place. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, im yesham tfisas yad shel baal habayis ina oser. Okay, so very important case. This touches upon the hotel case, and that is if the owner has a holding in the house, it doesn't cause prohibitions. Let's say you have a courtyard and you have, I own one house and one house is a tenant, okay? But in the tenant's house, I have the rights to go ahead and put things there. Some say that not only the rights, but actually do have things there. Like I have furniture. Like I rent out the house, but I have furniture in that house. So says Rehuda, then there's no restrictions. It's considered, even though I don't live in that other house, I'm renting it out, but it's still considered mine, right? This is why a hotel, we saw Rav Moshe said hotel is, you don't have to make Erev Chatzeros according to Rav Moshe, because the owner of the hotel, right, basically has furniture in each room, right? So it shows that it's all under one person. That's the idea. Okay. Says Amr B'Yehuda B'Yehuda Rav Shmuel Bar Shilas. Kamakom Shamar Hadar Sham Ina Oser. Anytime it says that this person lives there, does not restrict. Hanoser and Seruvo in an Erev. So any structure where we say that the structure is not considered a dwelling enough that the person living there would cause a prohibition. In other words, like the shed. Sorry, not the shed. The gatehouse, right? The gatehouse. So we said that a person living there, that doesn't cause prohibitions. So therefore, Hanos and Seruva and Erev. So placing an Erev in there, in the gatehouse, is not going to be good Erev. Chutz b'Beishar Yachid, with the exception of an individual's gatehouse, okay? Meaning, let's say you have a case where you have two courtyards trying to join together, and you have a gatehouse outside of one courtyard. So it's a gatehouse for only one person. That is considered just an extension of the house, and therefore that is considered a house. And therefore, if there's two courtyards want to join together, and there's a gatehouse in front of one courtyard, but it's a gatehouse used for one family, that's just considered an extension of the gatehouse, and you would be allowed to put the Erev there. Okay, let's just keep that on the side. Any time where they say you are not allowed to place the Erev there, Menichabo, shituf. You are allowed to place the shituf over there, right? The shituf is for the mavois. So, Erev Chatzeros, you're trying to make one home as the home for all of us. Shituf mavos, you're just trying to make it that it's a shared, like we're incorporated, like a business together. It doesn't have to be in a home; it's allowed to be in a courtyard, right? So, when it comes to Erev Chatzeros, you cannot place it in one particular. When it comes to Erev Chatzeros, you're only allowed to place it in a home. You can't place it in any other structure. When it comes to Shituf and Mavos, where you're just trying to incorporate as one entity, you could put it anywhere in the Chatzer. You could put it in one of these, gatehouse in a gatehouse. That would be fine. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so Menichabo Shituf Chutz me'avar Mavoi. You're not allowed to place it in the Mavoi itself. The Mavoi is what? The Mavoi is the street. You can't place it in the Mavoi. We'll see soon. The reason for that is because a Mavoi is not a protected place. Granted, you can put it anywhere in the space to show it's shared, but a shared corporation will not place their shared entity in something which is completely wide open, right? So placing in the streets, that's already too much. We're not going to allow that to happen. Okay. My Kamash Malan, the Gemara asks, what's the chiddush over here? Tanina was taught already that what is Rabbi Yehuda come and teach us? In an Erev. Erev Udelohavi, Hashidov Havi. The Mishnah already told us that a person is not allowed to place the Erev in the gatehouse, portico, or gallery. But the implication is that a shituf would be allowed. And so what's Rabbi Yehuda adding? So Gemara says, you're right, that line is not needed, but rather he's coming to teach us the following. Beishar Yachid, he's coming to teach us that a gatehouse of a single individual, that is novel. He's teaching us that a gatehouse of a single individual, you can place an Erev there. The Avar de Mavoy Tzrichale, and he's teaching us that the airspace of a Mavoy, that you're not allowed to place the Shituf and Mavos there. That didn't come out of our Mishnah. There was no implication in our Mishnah where you are allowed to place the Shituf and Mavos. So he's saying that, yes, the implication is that you're allowed to place your Shituf and Mavos anywhere in the courtyards, but Rabbi Yehuda's coming explicitly and tell us, but not in the street, because placing in the street, again, is not so safe. That's not mentioned explicitly in the Mishnah. Tanya Namihachi, we have a Bryce that supports this. We have a Bryce which says you place Erev in a gatehouse, portico, gallery, or a Chatzer, a Mavoi, it is an Erev. Vatnan, but also we have a Mishnah, it said Ain't Erev. So what's going on? On the one hand, Raisa says you can place your Erev in those places. Our Mishnah says you can place the Erev. So Gemara says, Ema Harei Shituf. So it must be that when the Brisa said you are allowed to place these things, it doesn't mean you're allowed to place Erev Chatzeros, rather means you're allowed to place Shituf and Mavos. Ask the Gemara, Shituf and Mavoi lo mintar. But the Mishnah, the Brisa also said you're allowed to place Shituf and Mavos in a Mavoi. We just said, but placing a Shituf in a Mavoi is not a secure place. So Ema Bechatzer Sheba Mavoi, it doesn't mean you're literally placed it in the Mavoi, in the streets, but it means a courtyard leading into a Mavoi. That's where you're allowed to place it, and bottom line is that's exactly what Rabbi Yehuda is coming to teach us, and implication of our Mishnah, that when it comes to Erev Chatzeros in a house only, in a livable house only, when it comes to Shituf and Mavos, anywhere in the courtyards, but it has to be protected enough, it can't be in the streets. We'll pick up and discuss this more tomorrow. Have a great day.